Hi, my name is Andres Simone. I'm the CEO of Finca International. I am very happy to welcome you to the first of a series of fireside chats that we'll be hosting throughout the year. This one, of course, in honor of International Women's Day. Today, we are here to celebrate everything that's been achieved so far in terms of bringing gender parity to the forefront of everyone's minds, to bringing women's voices into politics and into business. We have a long way to go yet, and we know that. Today I am wearing purple and red, the two women's power colors, in order to channel that strength to this conversation. I am absolutely delighted to be having this first conversation with an amazing person, Lucy Lee Helm, who served as the Executive Vice President of Starbucks. She is a mover and a change maker, as you will see. Before I invite Lucy to join us, just a couple more words. I think that, for many of us looking around the world today, there are so many challenges that we're facing in terms of climate events, in terms of social unrest, in terms of conflicts around the world. And some of you might be wondering, well, in that broader context, why are we having this conversation about gender? And I just want to remind you all that there's a lot of hard evidence that shows that in societies where women are more equally represented, particularly, of course, in politics, those communities tend to be more peaceful, they tend to be more prosperous, and they tend to be healthier. So there's a lot of good data as to why. And if that is not on its own enough to convince you, we also have hard evidence that shows that in companies that are more diverse, their performance from a financial perspective, let alone the social perspective, is significantly greater. So this is a day that we need to talk about this in order to keep this topic in the forefront of everyone's minds. And with that, I welcome Lucy Lee Helm to the conversation. Welcome, Lucy.
Andre, thank you for having me. I'm really privileged to join a strategic, impactful leader like yourself in conversation, and to be with the women and men of Finca in all of the work that you do to make it a more just and equitable society.
Thank you. Well, Lucy, you have had just such a remarkable career. You have fought for people with disabilities. You have a background in human resources. You also have a background as a lawyer. Your voice has been a super powerful one, not just at Starbucks, but also at Mercy Corps. I wondered if you would talk to us a little bit about the beginning of your career, how you developed the skills that have allowed you to be such an advocate going forward.
I'd be happy to. I think it's so important for women like you and like me who have, on the surface, made it, talk to people earlier in their career about the challenges, that it wasn't a straight line, that we all had hopes and ambitions, that some of which were realized, some of which are not. I started off really from a family that didn't even have college education. I certainly had no one around me that was in higher education or law or anything that would have motivated me there. But I did have a lot of great role models in my schools that encouraged me to use my voice. I was a loud kid who did debate and student council and all those things. And someone suggested that law might be a good career for me. I, before law, went into a lot of political policy things. I was interning with both the state and federal legislature. So I had that in my mind. And I didn't know what I was going to do when I went to law school. My first job was in a law firm where I was a trial lawyer, again, using that voice. And I liked it, didn't love it. I saw around me people that loved it. I tended to use most of my time in volunteer capacity. So I knew something was off in my career because I was spending so much time doing disability advocacy work, volunteering with legal aid societies, other things that I knew that there was something. So I went to a job as a disability advocate for a center we're called Center for Accessible Living, a disability rights center. And I think then I got caught that you could actually do jobs that were more impactful than what I was doing. but I took a job in Seattle at another law firm in order to move to Seattle from Louisville, Kentucky. And in there, I did another good job as a trial lawyer. But in Seattle, Starbucks is a really well-known
Mm-hmm.
employer. And I had many friends working there, and I met the general counsel, and she said, I really think you would be a good fit for that. I had a lot of, again, good background to be what they hired me for, which is the first litigator that worked for Starbucks in a time where we were pretty, 30 years ago when there wasn't that much of that. So I ended up at Starbucks because of the reputation it had for being a good employer.
Well, okay, so obviously you're pretty fearless. You called yourself loud, but I'm going to translate that as fearless. And you're clearly brilliant. But the really, like, the kernel of advice that I take away from all of the stuff that you said there was, that you were in a job that you liked but you didn't love. And I'm wondering if that's advice that you would give to other young women who are coming along in their own careers. Really understanding the difference between what you like and what you love, and putting yourself towards those things that you're the most passionate about.
100%.
Yeah.
I think it was my foremost piece of advice to people that I advised as a human resources professional when I went into that as a career, which
Yeah.
is really thinking about what you're passionate about before you take any job. And then realizing, especially those of us who have the benefit of a college education, and some flexibility before you take a job, don't sit in a job longer than you need to. There are jobs in which you will do a better job if you love and feel commitment and passion about its mission.
Yeah, that's awesome advice. And I think the other piece is, clearly you had people that knew you really well along the way, that helped you to see the places where it would be a really good fit for you. I know I certainly benefited from that in the early days of my career, developing close relationships with people who were a little bit more advanced or a lot more advanced. Who would say, "Are you sure you want to do that? Doesn't this thing appeal to you a little bit more?" And kind of reach out and help you along the way, right?
Not to mention, I think that another piece of advice, which is related to that, is to be open to and actually look for feedback on
Mm-hmm.
your performance, on how you come across, because you may think you're doing just a great job, but there are people that can observe you as a neutral party. And if you are open to that, if you are not being defensive about somebody saying, if I would change this or that, trusted people can give you great advice. And I think some of the most uncomfortable times I've had in my career was people telling me things I didn't want to hear. But then I incorporated that and I realized what a gift it was, because I wouldn't have known, what to do unless someone told me not to do it. And I think that the times where people were straight with me, and it teaches you to be straight with others as well, really helped me develop the strengths that I have, rather than fall into things that I wouldn't even know I didn't do well.
That's excellent advice. So in that early part of your career, when you were kind of just figuring out where you were, what was the thing that surprised you the most as you were building your career?
What's interesting, I think and this is, I'm not just setting you up here. I really realized early in my career that it's a man's world in the career sector. And I couldn't believe a number of obstacles. When I went to law school, back then, it's about over 55% of women in law schools now, but when I went, it was about 40%. And it still was a pretty big voice. But when I went to law firms, it was like 10%. Law is still one of the most underrepresented professions that there are. It's worse than doctors, worse than finance people. The law has really taken a long time to move. And I still practice law, particularly as a trial lawyer, as a very underrepresented minority. I also realized, even in Starbucks, even though there was, again, lots of women and much focus on diversity and inclusion, there's still those things that you don't think about. That women that are working mothers aren't given really consideration for flexible work schedules. And there was still gender parity issues in pay that we needed to work on. This is in a company that was really trying hard, because I think the workplaces were built hundreds of years ago for male workers, including the temperature at which buildings are set. And it's still, that amazed me and surprised me, despite the the things that had happened that had changed and the opportunities I had, that there were also barriers.
Yeah, I can relate to that very much. I remember when I was coming out of graduate school, and we were going through interviews, we were advised to always wear stockings. And so the assumption being that you were going to be wearing a skirt, and that, you know, you have to have stockings and heels, even though we were working side by side in very professional environments. And then, you know, even when I was a bit younger, and I may have even told you this, but you know, I kind of adopted a uniform very early on where I was wearing pantsuits with cowboy boots because, you know, I felt like I wanted to really make sure that I was gender neutral in an environment and not feeling overly feminized. So, and it was very, very different. I feel like we've made so much progress in that regard, but we have to continue to keep that very, very top of mind.
I agree with you.
Awesome. Well, uh, we talked about women in their careers and thinking about how they should negotiate, and you know, different pieces of advice that you gave that were marvelous. I want to pivot a little bit to financial inclusion. Of course, you know that financial inclusion is at the heart of what we do as an organization. Um, you know, you were having this incredible career at Starbucks, and then suddenly you made a decision to get involved with Mercy Corps. What prompted that?
You know, I am a person that is late to the party of understanding the value of international and global citizenship. You know, I was raised in a small town or smallish town in Kentucky. And it's not that my parents who didn't go to college, but were very educated in many ways, but we never took a trip. We never had a passport. And we really never thought about how things impacted anything outside the US. And, you know, even when I went to college and was a legislative intern and did policy advocacy for people with disabilities and went to law school, I still did not think beyond my US world, had not traveled, had not done anything. And it was interesting as I joined a global company. That really changed for me because not only was Starbucks or is Starbucks a retail operation in, you know, most half of the countries plus in the world, but it also has a supply chain and a where they get their goods, you know, that is very global oriented. We are reliant on farmers across the world to do our product. And I think, again, I never really understood that and the importance of even just being a US citizen and how we fit into the globe. I got into Mercy Corps because I was anxious to understand how we could do better in supporting. You know, I started with traumas and who to give to in the event of bad things happening. And so I looked at places, you know, what's the Red Cross equivalent in other countries, and so I looked at that. And one of the places that I found was Mercy Corps. First of all, I just was a donor. That's how I got involved. And I learned of its deep roots in the Pacific Northwest where I live. And then I realized how unique it was as an organization. Starbucks and Seattle are very much more global than what I was used to anyway. You know, we have the Gates Foundation here. We have lots of reasons to think beyond our community. So that helped me. But Mercy Corps and my attachment to it grew when I realized the kind of work they did. And, you know, one of the secrets that they did to donors is they said, what are you interested in? So they didn't just put an envelope in a, you know, in another envelope asking you to give. They didn't even ask that. They said, so we saw you gave to Haiti. What interests you about Haiti? Is it women's issues? Is it issues of rebuilding? What is the thing that you're interested in? And so I really got attached to Mercy Corps and the good that it was doing in the world.
That's phenomenal. And they're very lucky to have you as an advisor and a leader. So you know, you've spent quite a bit of time with them, and I know that you've been involved with you know, all of their operations globally. And so, you know, there are a lot of parallels. I
Yes.
think it does. One of the things that all of us are really trying to figure out is we know that women are, of course, the most overrepresented when it comes to poverty and exclusion, and that they need more than just financial services in order to get out of poverty. You know, based on what you've seen, what do you think we could be doing more that's actually going to help to lift women out of poverty in the countries that we work in?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that like Finca in Mercy Corps, we saw that in the world's toughest places, the women were carrying the load. And we found success. I found that through other agencies like global partnerships, that micro mentoring, when you gave to women, the success rate was doubled. And that the loans, the support, the education that you could give to women was really important. We found that because in the world's toughest places like Colombia and Nicaragua, where we were looking at coffee farming, the women were the coffee farmers, the women were the tea farmers, and they were running things. And so therefore, again, it was a very natural thing for us to invest in women because it was a return on investment for us. And I think with Mercy Corps, we have learned how much stronger the organizations are in tough places if you notice and give women's an opportunity and a voice.
For sure. One of the anecdotes, I guess it's not an anecdote, but evidence that we have that has always struck me so powerfully is in Afghanistan. Finca was known for really focusing on the inclusion of women. And we created a women-only branch. And, typically our branches took about a year in order to break even and become sustainable. And it was the fastest break even that had ever happened across the entire network in terms of a branch being opened and becoming sustainable. And I think we all know and recognize that when you put that investment dollar into a woman, the returns that you get are really, as you said, far beyond just the individual woman too,
Yeah.
but affect the community, affect the education of children, affect the health and well-being of the family. So we need to encourage more investment into women because the impact of that dollar is significantly greater. Just as I said at the very beginning of this conversation, more diverse companies perform better, more diverse societies perform better, but also that investment that gets made in those women really pays more. And as long as that disconnect exists, we should take advantage of it, right?
The other thing that I would add, Andrea, is it also makes a difference how we invest in your own employees, like the Finca employees, commercial employees. And one of the things that our new CEO, I say new, but she's been enrolled in Mercy Corps for 3 years now, but as a woman leader, has been very focused on diversity and inclusion of her own team and looking at the country leaders where we had a gap. Again, we were doing great hiring local, and so we had women very often represented well in our Mercy Corps staff, but the leadership ranks needed a little diversification. Yeah. And I think having a focus on that as an example of to the people that you serve in your communities, and to the people that do the work and create the strategies and create the programs and lead the programs, it's important to have women represented highly in your organization as well.
I completely agree. So let's unpack that a little bit more if we could, because also at Finca, we've been working on being very intentional about that. We have increased the proportion of female employees, both at the leadership level and just generally, we're up to 44% now. It's been increasing steadily year over year. But you have to be intentional about that, like you said. Now, obviously, we'd like to see complete parity because we want to make sure that we are fully reflecting also the clients that we want to serve. What are some of the key things that you think Mercy Corps has done really well to be intentional about that parity and representation and driving diversity?
I'm going to give examples of both Mercy Corps and Starbucks because we're both organizations. I think the intentionality is key. Number one, it's adoption at the highest levels of the organization. So you have to see the commitment at the top, not just the people that want it. So you have to have your CEOs and your executive team not only saying it, but living it. Number two is I think it needs to be data driven. So again, it's not just simply because it's anecdotally we want that to happen and there's 50% women, so let's just have, in the world, so let's just represent us. It's not about that. It's about also being very clear, honest, and transparent about where your gaps are. So you can't wait to share the data until you're perfect. If you do, then again, you'll never share the data. And you should be clear with your employees and your customers and your donors that this is the gap that exists and this is where we want to get to. It was important at Mercy Corps to do that, again, to say where we are and where we want to be. And then when you report out, then you show progress, because this stuff takes time. You can't make the switches. I have learned from data practitioners in diversity and inclusion that the way that you make a difference is 5% a year, 3% a year. Then all of a sudden it becomes that you're at the 50% mark, but you can't just turn it over overnight, because the threat of that is like, you're not trying to kick out men or make men less. It's or under other overrepresented people. We're just trying to build the openness and inclusion to continue to make progress. So I think data is very important. I think then reporting on progress is very important, and showing again what you're doing. And then I think it is really important to have very specific policies and strategies of what you're doing, and then report on that as well, because wishing won't make it so. Just simply saying that we're committed doesn't change anything when you see that the problem might be that women don't get at the table, that you can't reach out in your programs to actually see women who would even raise their hands to be part of it. So finding the solutions and the strategies by which you're going to advance parity, whether it's pay parity within your organization or whether it's program parity within the people that you serve.
So because we're talking about big global organizations, one of the challenges that I think all of us confront is around the fact that cultural norms are very different, right? FICA operates across 40 different countries. And put bluntly, in some of the places where we work, the cultural norm is that women aren't going to work outside the home, right? Or that women can't even travel alone outside the home. And so how do you think through setting a bar of, what you think is best in class in terms of diversity and inclusion, while still respecting and honoring the fact that, the norms in different places are very different?
I think the answer because you just said it, which is the fact that you have to respect that the differences are there. You can't pretend that your global institution can have norms that are 100% across the globe. And any company that is global, whether it is a for-profit company like Starbucks or Mercy Corps or Finca, we embrace the fact that we have a very diverse culture of people we serve, of programs, and the people that work for us. And so I think you need to meet the teams where they are and meet people where they are. I think that there can be fine to have differences in how you have programs. The strategies can be different. So what I think what we've done in both Mercy Corps and Starbucks is, first of all, raise up what are the values, what are the behavioral norms, what are the things that we can say are universal, because there are some universal things, again, about how we treat each other, about how we think of things, about the language we use, etc. But I think especially for an organization like ours, we can't Americanize our concepts of DEI. Just the very phrases that are so important to us. Underrepresented. Well, what does that mean in another country? And then, as you say, there are cultural differences that it's very hard, because while we don't want to support them, in the sense of or normalize behaviors that again wouldn't be normal in the United States, for example, you still need to embrace that that's where they are. And I think asking the people in those countries to help you develop the strategies is really important. If you go to the top and then try to then do things top down, it's just not going to work. So again, that ability to strategize as a whole organization using the basic principles, behavior norms, and others that are common to your organization, I think is really critical. And then noting progress, right? It's important to acknowledge and be transparent about the differences, but then saying this is where we want to close the gaps. The other thing that I think we found is the celebrating the difference. So finding the heroes in the place. So, Martin Luther King is not necessarily the hero of the day, to, not that he isn't, but he's not as well known in another country. So who is the person that is touting equality in the countries, or you know, our voice for women, and using them as role models, not necessarily the people that are in the United States in your organization? We found that helpful. And also celebrating what's important. So I'll take an example in China. For Starbucks, it was very, very important for us to recognize the importance of parents to our employees. So something we never could have done in the US is celebrate by inviting parents to the recognition ceremonies for our employees in China. But parent partner, well, that's their employee name, forums were extremely important there, and also helped women, because again, we had some challenges with some parents who didn't want women to take certain jobs in China. But when they got to know the company and we become proud of and knew how we were treating their daughters, then they became more willing to put people in roles that they might not have been. So again, something that wouldn't have fit in any other country but China, fit in China. And our willingness to take that on and celebrate it, I think, you know, is a great thing for the whole diversity discussion.
So like you said some really powerful things. So I want to take the liberty of kind of summarizing, because I do think that first of all, you know, coming at it from a data perspective, really, and showing everyone the value that you get from having more diversity, right? And
Right.
it's not about this is right and this is wrong. It's about, you know, this is an opportunity to really create a situation that can be very valuable, like the situation that you were just talking about with the parents and the children. And so, you know, we are aspiring to create a society where we have that kind of value that we're generating. We want a company that has that kind of value that we're generating. And then being honest about the gap, I think is a phenomenal way of doing it. You know, we track that data across, and it's interesting, but people are so creative at coming up with their own unique ways of filling that gap. You know, I have been so blown away by at Finca, people coming up with job sharing ideas to really encourage women to stay in the workforce once they've had children, so that there is more flexibility for them that they need to have at home, and all of the support that's been given to encourage that. In our call centers where, you know, we have individuals with disabilities who haven't had the opportunity to work at all in the countries that they're in, but suddenly, because we have these call center opportunities, you know, it's a good fit. And our team is so proud to be able to offer that encouragement and that support. And they see it as, you know, they're changing things. And I think that to me is like the most powerful kind of solution, right? Because it comes from the grassroots.
I think you said something very powerful there, which is that again, you can't create diversity and inclusion at a 100-foot level. It's really
Right.
the individuals and celebrating the things that they do. And we even realized at Starbucks among the different departments. So what diversity meant to the tech team was really different than what diversity meant to the retail operations. The tech team was having trouble hiring and promoting and putting leadership roles of women in tech, because that was kind of a gap that was you know, really specific to their profession. That wasn't so in HR, for example, which is overloaded with women. So giving the power and empowering those groups to make their own decisions and go about that was really important. Another thing that you said, globally, what helped is really identifying those issues which are common. So gender is one of those things, even though we might treat it differently, that everybody wants to have respect among genders, even in those countries that treat women a little bit differently or that have different roles as expectations. Disability is another one. That is one that really crosses across the globe. And we had really great progress at Starbucks by really promoting the hiring of people that are deaf. And again, we could really do that universally. So we had signing stores in a lot of our Asian countries because they really have a great respect for sign language and people that are deaf and hard of hearing. And so it was an exciting cross-cultural thing that we could do universally.
That is awesome. Thank you. You're giving me lots of ideas, and I'm sure the team lots of ideas. So I really appreciate that. Well, so I want to pivot now, because we have a lot of ground to cover on this important day, to the question of partnership. Um,
Mhm.
so, as you know, we have as an organization the ambition that we want to end poverty. Small ambition.
Yeah.
But after 40 years, we have certainly realized that there's no chance that we're going to be able to do that alone. That people need a lot more than just financial services in order to get out of poverty, but also increasingly we need technical partners. We want to work more closely with funding partners. So in your experience, both organizations, Starbucks and Mercy Corps, can you tell me a little bit about what your example of kind of an ideal partnership looks like?
I do 100% agree with you that no organization can do any hard thing alone. It is that African proverb that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I think that that model really should motivate both for-profit and nonprofit organizations. Um, Within Starbucks, one of the really honestly, the thing that I learned and the value that I learned is that doing good, or so doing well by doing good, was something that was not thought of as a competitive advantage. We wanted that for everyone. So we didn't want to be able to, be the rising star company because we were much more diverse than its other country, our company. We wanted to do it by modeling and showing others what they did. And those kind of unselfish partnerships, I think actually are good for both. So it is not necessarily bad for, your bottom line or your progress or your success to be a partner. It actually is something that I think you can do more effectively with others. I think that the idea of leveraging the strengths, leveraging the talents, the money, the resources that you might not have through partnerships with others is really critical. I think it pushes you to a different understanding. It makes you think differently because any organization can get stuck on their own strategies and their own viewpoint. And partnering with someone who does something different, who does it a different way, really strengthens your own ability and your own strategies because you learn how to do it differently. And it focuses you when you're a partnership to be very clear about what you do. So when you're introducing yourself to another partner, you have to talk about here's why I do what I do, here's the basis for it, here's our values. And so I think all of those things make you stronger when you partner with another effective organization.
That is excellent. What about any pitfalls or watch outs when you're thinking about partnering?
Well, I think you have to do it again. And we'll go back to the word that you used earlier, which is intentionality. You don't want to just slip into a partnership of an informal means because I do think you need to know who's on first. It means that you have an aligned vision, so that, again, whatever you're doing together, it might not be everything together, but just one project, one strategy, or one deliverable, a clarity of objectives. So it requires you to sit down before you work together in any kind of partnership to really talk about what those are, framework about which you are going to work. Because again, I think we too often go into these things and expect that our norms, our behaviors, the way we work, how we operate, how we measure things, or how somebody else does it. So again, taking the time, the intentionality to build the partnership before you start running that partnership. What are your roles and responsibilities? What are your expectations? What are the investments that you are each going to make? And then what's the outcomes that you want to see? And like any other thing that you're doing strategically, it means that you have to sit back and look at what's going on periodically, measure success, talk about success, be transparent about the things that are the gaps, and then keep working it. I don't think it's really any different than how you run your operations, which is,
Yeah.
you use all those things with clarity, objectives, and all that, but you really have to do that with another partner and not just assume because you might be on this, have the same purpose that you have this. It might be a whole different reason for getting into business with you by one organization, even if you have an outlying, okay, this is what we want to achieve, but what's in it for them and what's in it for you, and recognizing that you could have differences there.
What's really funny to me is listening to you talk about this, all of which I agree with, by the way. I'm also struck by how much it really is the same advice that you would give about building a good personal relationship with someone, right? That,
That's
you know,
true.
you're clear about what your differences are, how you complement each other. You know, you have to negotiate beyond. I think a lot of organizations, and I've certainly made this mistake myself in the past, kind of you focus on the term sheet, you focus on the commercials, and you lose sight of that broader context that you need to have around it, because ultimately it's about people working with people. And so you have to have a shared vision. You have to have that shared ethos. You know, what I'm noticing about our partnerships, which is very exciting to me, we've got some really good ones that we're developing, and the best of them are where we have started out co-creating with our
Yeah.
partner. You know, it's not like, oh, we have a square over here and we're looking for a square to fit that square, but it's really, we've met someone that we think has complementary skills, as you said, but most importantly, we like them. You know, we think that they have an ambition that aligns with ours and a vision that aligns with ours. And so we sit down together and say, what could we do? What might that look like? And those seem to be the ones that are really having the greatest impact. Does that resonate with
Sure.
you? Yeah.
Yeah, and you want to enjoy that time. It's not something that you should be holding your nose and doing. It should be something that you are, like you say, and investing in the relationship is important. And you know, Andre, it's not different than how you treat the communities where you work, which is you go in with mutual respect. You don't presuppose that the things that you want to do for them is what they need. So you know, the very idea of localization and listening to them is the same thing here, is not presuming that you're the one running it, but that you're doing that together. And I think mutual respect and relationship building is a great part of any partnership.
Yeah, I completely agree. So actually, when we started revisiting our own strategy as an organization last year, the first thing that we did was we did an assessment of what the needs of our customers
Mm.
were. And you know, we put the voice of the customer at the very center and asked them, like, what do they most need in order to get out of poverty and to solve their own challenges? And I fully embrace that. I think that increasingly, you know, we have the capability to really listen to people by looking at data and collecting data in a much lighter way, and then designing solutions that meet them exactly where they are, as you said. So that's fantastic.
Interestingly, that it goes right back to our discussions that we just had, which are on diversity and inclusion,
Yeah,
because increasingly what we're seeing is the important word is not diversity. Representation is important, but it's inclusion. And I think
yeah.
that inclusion and making sure that we all belong is the key to it, which is recognizing people's differences, recognizing that, again, that each of us brings strengths to the conversation, and that, you know, mutual thriving is what we're after. That is increasingly what we're talking about in Mercy Corps. That word thrive and mutual thriving means that everyone has that opportunity. And you know that that's a big thing for you. The opportunities for all really have to mean that. It has to mean not what we think they need, but what opportunities they're seeking and what opportunities would really change their lives.
Wonderful. Well, Lucy, we're getting to the end of our conversation. You have just been such a fantastic discussant. I'm so grateful. Before we leave everyone, we want to put something a little bit more concrete on the table. We're both extremely passionate about this idea of gender parity. You know, I'll happily lead with a couple of things that I will personally commit to, but
Yep.
also, you know, wanted to ask you if you had any advice as to how we get everyone who's going to listen to this to do something concrete. So I will pledge again, and I really, this is something that I am working on. First of all, to examine my own unconscious biases continually. I know that sounds like a soft thing. It's actually extremely hard. But it is something I think that even as a woman who wants to promote gender parity, I do find myself sometimes making judgments on the basis of things that are really truly are mysterious to me, and I always try and bring that back to you know, concretely, how am I being intentional about this? To you know, we have made enormous progress as an organization in really being intentional about our recruitment and making sure that we have a slate that always includes women. But that is something that I know that I personally can do more about, and will continue to drive that particular point. And then I want to put out there one last thought that I have, which is mentoring. This is something that is a struggle for everyone. We never have enough time to do everything that we want to do. But I try to always carve out time to meet with young people, to share advice, but also just the encouragement alone. And we talked at the very beginning of this amazing conversation. You were reflecting on the people who took you aside when you were young and loud, and who encouraged you to pursue things that might have been far-reaching dreams from where you were sitting. And so I think we have to continue to do that, and I certainly am signing up for it. I'm sure you have great suggestions, so I'll hand the microphone to you.
Thank you. I like all of yours and probably would have said some of them. Let me add a couple more. One is, I just think as an individual, I think what you said first is really important. Start with yourself. And I think I'm going to say two things about that. One is supporting other women. And that doesn't mean that doesn't just mean if you're a manager. It means your peers. It means the people that that work on tiers below you. Support them. U.S. Secretary of State Madeleine Albright has the quote that there's a special place in hell for women who don't support other women. And she actually spoke at Starbucks and talked about that. She really believed that we are our own worst enemies sometime. And if we can't support them, it really is important to advocate, promote, say good things about your women peers. But it doesn't mean accepting bad behavior. That is not what I mean. Tolerating things that aren't right. It also means calling out your peers. I remember having a colleague on the executive level who really could say offensive things in meetings. But the last thing I was going to do is call her out at the meeting. But I did have, and you have to have a brave voice, talk to her and say, Kate, I think that you are really over talking people and it is really offending others, and nobody's telling you that. And so I'm going to tell you. And so we had a little thing. She was very open to the feedback. And then when she would do that in a meeting, I would call her up by a little signal on my ear or something to make sure that maybe she'd stop talking the way she was talking. And she supported me in other ways. But that's what I mean by supporting other women, not, saying that all women are best, but saying how can we have unique ways of relationships relating to our peers. I also means that we have to check your unconscious bias, which is sometimes even conscious, which is things that we wouldn't tolerate, either call it out or not. And that, to me, one of my hot buttons is language. We use language to describe women, whether it's in performance reviews or just informal discussions, that we would not use for men. And I'd say everything from the words bossy or drama queen or you're too emotional, they're not okay. And you can't use them against other women, and we have to call it out when other women use it. I will tell you that when I had my first performance review by a woman boss, and she said, "I'm just going to tell you, I've gotten feedback, and your male peers sometimes saying you're bossy." And I said, "I dare say that you have never called a man bossy." And she was shocked because she said, "You're right. I've never called a man bossy." And I said, "I think that they don't like that I try to control a situation or that I use my power, but bossy is not an acceptable term to use for other women." And I think that kind of language, telling people to smile, "Oh, she's so much," is all examples of how we don't allow women, we wouldn't use the same language or expectations of men. And I think it's really important to call that out. And the last thing I would say, it's really important to be the strongest woman you can be, to stand up for yourself and to not fall prey to expectations and norms that you might have that might be underneath you, that you just haven't been told that you can't do right. There are way too many women who don't raise their hand because they don't feel they're capable, when all studies will say that men who are not even capable will raise their hand and say, "Yeah, I can do that." And a woman will say, "Well, I could maybe do it, but maybe I'm going to hold back." And it happens all the time. Stand up for yourself, take a chance, be curious, say yes when you're scared. and do things again to stand up for yourself. Don't take the notes in the room. Don't sit in the chair because you're too polite, outside the table. Belly up right to the bar. And, sit where you are entitled and feel strong, even though that sometimes is very hard. So stand up for yourself first. I think your own example is the best example to empower other women.
What a fireball to end on. I think that's awesome. Lucy, you have been such a joy to speak with. Thank you for helping us kick off this series. I think we all look up to and admire the example that you've set. And I hope that you keep those fires stoked, because we have a lot more change to make together. Thank you.
Thank you. And I just really am grateful for all the women and men that are listening to this presentation and investing in themselves by learning and by changing just a one step at a time to do better things for themselves in the world. And I certainly thank all of the people in your organization for doing such change-making world and impactful work, and such impactful work that really has changed what's going on in the world today.
Thank you.
Thank you.